I want to talk to you today about one of my favorite arguments for the existence of God. It's an argument in Augustine, but it's an argument that has been ignored almost completely in the subsequent literature. There's no reference to it in Anselm or Aquinas or Descartes or Leibniz or any of the subsequent thinkers who write about these topics and advocate some kind of argument a priori or a posteriori for the existence of God. It seems to have been utterly neglected. Now, I think part of the reason for that is that it appears in his work on free will, and it appears in a section which really therefore seems orthogonal for the most part to the main aspect of the dialogue. So Augustine tosses it out there while really discussing something else. It takes a few pages. The structure of it, especially as we get toward the end, toward actually linking it to God, seems to be contained in just a paragraph or two that are not very well spelled out. And so I think people have been baffled about whether this argument even exists in Augustine, let alone that it's a very powerful argument. It was almost immediately ignored. But I think it's actually a really interesting and really powerful argument, one that you can use to really construct, you might say, as a recipe, a series of arguments for the existence of God, based on the possibility of reference, of meaning, of content, as well as of truth, of knowledge, a variety of other things. So today I'll focus both on the notion of truth or knowledge, which are really the things that I think are central to Augustine's concerns, but also I want to talk about a semantic version of this argument that focuses on content, broadly speaking, meaning, reference, communication, other aspects of things having content. Well, what on earth is going on in this argument? I think we have to see it as taking a skeptical argument and turning it on its head. So let's start with skepticism. What is skepticism? Today we often describe skepticism as the view that knowledge is impossible, or at any rate, the claim that we don't know whether knowledge is possible. Some skeptics say, I know nothing. Others say, I don't even know whether I know anything. But in any case, that's a topic for another lecture. What I'm interested in is the idea that a skeptic says, my ideas, my representations, my beliefs, something that is going on in my mind, perhaps the sentences I speak, so it might be something external as well, does not match reality. Or at least I am not in a position to know whether it matches. Now, modern skeptics focus on knowledge, and it is easiest for us to talk that way. But Miles Bernier has stressed that ancient skeptics had a much broader conception. They were concerned not just with the notion of knowledge, but with the concept of reasonable belief. They tended to think not just, I don't know, such and such. After all, you might say, well, maybe I don't know, but I have pretty good reason to believe. They were concerned with whether I have any reason to believe it at all, whether I should believe it as opposed to its opposite. They say, there's no reason that would push me in one direction or another. So that's an even deeper conception. Anytime I mention knowledge here, we could more faithfully to the ancient text talk about reasonable belief, and it applies just as well. So what does the skeptic typically do? They construct what I'll call a skeptical scenario. It's one where my state of mind, whether it's a belief or something like a meaning or whatever it happens to be, does not match the world. And I cannot tell from within that state that it doesn't match the world. I think we can distinguish two kinds of skeptical scenarios. There are, as it were, local scenarios. That is to say, I can't tell that I am suffering some kind of illusion, that I can't tell that there's a mismatch between my state of mind and the world, but that's due to limitations of my state. I might be able to change my state in such a way that I can tell. So, for example, it may be that I'm seeing an illusion. I see that something has a certain shape over there. I think it's one thing, but I walk over toward it more closely and see that it's not. So, to take some examples common in Indian skepticism, maybe I fear that that's a snake, but I look more closely and I realize it's just a rope. Or I think that's a person over there, but I get closer and I realize it's just a post, for example. We can also talk about more global skepticism, global in the sense that the scenario is one that I can't really get out of. I can't determine that it's a mismatch from not only within that particular state, but period. I can't expand my state. So think about Descartes' evil deceiver. Descartes imagines that there is an evil deceiver, an all-powerful being out to trick me, to make sure everything I say, everything I think, every idea I have is a mismatch to reality. If that's really what's going on, I have no way of determining that that's what's going on. I can't tell, not only within this state, there's nothing I can do to find out whether that's right or wrong, to find out that that is a mismatch. So I can walk over to the thing I think might be a snake and see that it's a rope, but I can't walk over and somehow find out that I am or am not suffering an illusion. Now, of course, Descartes constructs an argument. He thinks maybe I can figure out that I'm not actually the victim of an evil deceiver. But if I am the victim, there's no way for me to figure out that I am. I cannot perceive the mismatch. And people have constructed other scenarios that are global skeptical scenarios in this way. Perhaps I'm a brain in a vat, for example. If I am, there's no way for me to find out that I'm a brain in a vat. Or suppose I'm in the Matrix. There's no way from within that, or really within that entire system of representations, to find out that I'm inside the Matrix. It would take some external force on me, some external revelation, something like a red pill, in order to do it. We can also distinguish kinds of skepticism. The general form of the argument, of course, is going to be that I might be in one of those skeptical scenarios. It's a possibility for me, and it's especially scary when it's one of those global scenarios, where it's not just that I can't figure out that there's a mismatch right now, I can't do anything about it. I can't, in principle, find out that it's a mismatch. Some of those might be traditional epistemological mismatches. I have a belief. I have something I think I know, but actually there's a mismatch between that and the world. I don't really know. In fact, I don't even perhaps have a reasonable belief. I'm wrong. It might be an idea. I have this idea that things in the world are blah blah blahs. Sometimes anyway, I have this concept, and it turns out that concept doesn't match the world at all. I'm trying to categorize a set of square pegs in terms of round holes maybe in my mind. There could be a fundamental mismatch of conceptualization in that way. Maybe it's a question of reference. Maybe there's a mismatch between the things I refer to in the world and what's really there. I suffer from a deep ontological confusion. Or maybe it's a more semantic issue. Maybe I'm confused about my words having a meaning. And in fact, maybe they don't have any meaning at all. I think that I mean what you mean and what I meant yesterday, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm meaning something different. And indeed, maybe it turns out none of my words, none of my thoughts have any meanings or bear any content whatsoever. Well, all of those are disturbing possibilities. And here's the way we might construct an argument. I'm going to frame this argument about knowledge, but it's one we could reframe about meaning. We can reframe it about reasonable belief, about all sorts of things. So here's the idea. Given a state of mind, or even a system of states of mind, you could say, among our epistemic possibilities are skeptical scenarios for that state. It's possible that I'm wrong, okay, that I'm perceiving something in front of me and I'm wrong about it. I'm suffering some kind of illusion or hallucination. Or perhaps I'm a victim of an evil deceiver. Anyway, I have no way in principle of ruling that out. Seems like a possibility. Second premise, I have no grounds for discounting those skeptical scenarios. You might say, okay, I admit they're possible, but look, they're really far-fetched. They're really remote. And that's the way most people respond to something like the scenario of being a brain in a vat, or being trapped in the Matrix, or having an evil deceiver out to trick me. I mean, yeah, Descartes, sure, Putnam, yeah, maybe it's possible, right? But it seems very far-fetched. I'm pretty sure that's not true. It seems like a remote possibility. So maybe I have ways of doing that, but here the argument is, well, look, if I have ways of doing that, I must have some grounds for doing it. What are my grounds for doing it? Why do I say that's a remote possibility? The claim is, I don't have any grounds for saying that. It's like, well, because it would be really uncomfortable if I admitted it. But look, that's not much of a ground. I have no reason for thinking that's a remote possibility. I could know, or even have a reasonable belief, that my state of mind is veridical, that it matches the world, unless I had grounds for discounting those skeptical scenarios, for considering them very remote. I don't have those. So, conclusion is, I can't know that my states of mind are veridical. In fact, I may not even have any grounds for a reasonable belief that they're veridical. I have no reason to believe that my states of mind match the world. I have no reason to believe that my concepts match the structure of the world. Well, I can apply the same thing semantically. I can say, think about something that bears a content, that has some kind of content, like a thought, an idea, a word, a phrase, a sentence. You might say the same thing. Among our possibilities are skeptical scenarios for that. Maybe I've somehow gotten a blow to the head, and I don't mean today what I meant yesterday. I've gotten confused. Or maybe I cleared up a confusion, but whatever it is, maybe my language has changed. Maybe my thinking has changed. My concept has changed. Maybe my concepts don't match the world. Maybe my meanings don't match the world. Maybe there is some kind of radical mismatch, either between meanings and other meanings, contents and other contents, or between contents and what they're supposed to be describing or representing. In any case, skeptical scenarios like that seem possible. There's a good account of one in Kripke's book on Wittgenstein. I won't go here into the details, but it's a disturbing thought. There might be a serious mismatch between the contents I think that my words and thoughts have and contents they really have, if any. But are there any grounds for my discounting these skeptical scenarios? No, I have no reason to think those are remote possibilities at all. If my thought, if my idea, if my words, if my things that bear some kind of content semantically have a specific content, it's by virtue of some fact. And if there is a fact by which they have some specific content, well, then, at least if I could know that fact, I would have grounds for discounting those skeptical scenarios. But wait a minute. I don't have any such grounds? There appears to be no such fact. So, thoughts, ideas, words, sentences, utterances can't have any specific content at all. Now, I think Plato actually has a strategy in mind for switching all of this around. And Augustine is a Platonist, so he starts from this Platonic perspective. He says, well, wait a minute. Actually, when we're describing these skeptical scenarios, they are far-fetched, right? We have to say, look, I know it sounds insane, but what if you're a brain in a vat? Or what if all of your ideas are somehow radically mismatched to reality? Or what if there's an evil deceiver out to get you? What if you're trapped in the Matrix? It all sounds outlandish. What if your words don't mean today at all what they meant yesterday? I say, well, maybe. I can't say it's impossible, but it seems weird, right? In other words, Augustine, and I think Plato, say, in fact, you have grounds, right? You are discounting those skeptical scenarios. You're listening to the skeptic, you're saying, I can't prove to you that these things are impossible, but they seem far-fetched. I'm not really going to take them very seriously. And many skeptics admit that's the way you ought to do it. Nagarjuna, the famous Indian skeptic, says, look, I don't mean to challenge, for all practical purposes, the workaday world. Of course, go back and do your jobs. Don't be afraid you have no reason to do anything. And David Hume, similarly, entertains skeptical scenarios and then says, but you know, that's for the seminar room. I'm now going to walk down the hall and start playing billiards, and I'm going to assume that when I move the cue stick, it's going to hit the ball, and that ball is going to hit another ball and cause it to move, etc. The skeptics themselves, in most cases, admit that, yeah, these are far-fetched, and we can push them aside. We can discount them for practical purposes. But now, if that's true, if we can discount them, there must be grounds for discounting. And so the conclusion is, look, in fact, I do have reason to believe that I'm talking in front of a camera. Hume does have reason to believe that when he strikes the cue ball, it's going to move. Nagarjuna does have reason to believe that if he doesn't eat, he might die. And so all of these things are things that we do have reason to believe, but that means we have to have grounds for discounting the skeptical scenarios.